Raise your hand if there's a power plant in your neighborhood. One. Raise your hand if during the heat waves last summer, you had to take your kid to the emergency room because he or she was having an asthma attack. Raise your hand if often you have to make a choice every month between paying an electric or gas bill and a medical bill. Whew. It's a kind of somber and dark way to start this talk, I will admit. And it's also not a surprise that very few people in this room here at MIT in this kind of conference raised your hand. So even with this kind of start, I'm hoping in the next 10 minutes to take you on a journey that is actually filled with optimism and truly sustainable solutions. So the climate crisis is not just a climate of greenhouse gas emissions, whether it's CO2 or methane, et cetera. It's a crisis of past and current environmental injustice. It's a crisis of economic exclusion. And if we try to solve this crisis with the tools that we've used in the past to address environmental problems, we're not going to solve it. We're not going to impact the people who we most want to impact. We're not going to make justice out of injustices. And in fact, we're not going to hit the targets that we know that we need to hit to have a sustainable future. Here are three reasons why. First, we have a responsibility to right past wrongs. We know low-income and disadvantaged communities are hit first and worst with climate change, and we know that they've experienced disproportionate impacts, cumulative impacts from pollution. Second, communities on the front lines have the most to gain or lose. Big gains are possible in community resilience, in energy costs, in energy security, and in jobs. Third, and here's what policymakers like me, admittedly, older, privileged, white men, a lot of us in the room, okay, a lot of quiet, okay, that's fair enough. That's what we've historically missed. Communities on the front lines have a unique perspective, lived experience, expertise about solutions that are needed. What's needed is to tap into that local knowledge, local empowerment to hit the kinds of goals that we need to hit. If we truly do the work of climate justice from the grassroots up and center those who have suffered the most from the myriad injustices, then we have an incredible opportunity to actually unleash the ideas and the leadership of those who have imagined futures out of necessity. And in general, the broader climate action movement hasn't always followed those three tenets and put justice or communities at the center. But in the Biden-Harris administration and many administrations all over the country, state and municipal, we have an opportunity now to deliver and do that, and do it in a way that's fast and scalable. Here's an example. Just this past summer, I was in Dorchester with EPA Administrator Michael Regan. You can see him there in the picture. We were at a public housing complex in Dorchester, majority black community in Boston, where we listened to community members. We went to apartment buildings and tried to understand what was going on in those apartments. And we could hear stories of the tenants who lived there. We would also walk through the neighborhood and see things like this, the fossil fuel power plant right in the middle of the community. I saw a neighborhood, though, that was reinvigorated. The positive side of this is that action is being taken. In Boston, there's a reinvigorated Boston Housing Authority that connects with communities in ways that have never happened before, and certainly not on the scale. We're lucky in Boston to have a mayor, Michelle Wu, who's been driving this agenda since she's been in office and connecting with the US EPA, state government in fundamental ways. And we heard from tenants solutions, local non-governmental organizations that could bring energy efficiency, lower energy costs, comfort, and cleaner air. And standing in the background at this event, at the edge of the crowd, was a group of community teenagers. And what these teenagers were set out to do was be part of a workforce development program. And those teenagers were going to learn the future of being the next union laborers, the next engineers, the next lawyers who would craft clean energy contracts, the next installers who were going to bring energy efficiency and clean energy technologies to their neighborhoods. But that's not all that happened. What was truly exciting about that day was that we announced the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. This is a Biden-Harris administration program developed in the Inflation Reduction Act, and it's going to expand how we can pay for clean energy and the process that we do it in a way that's going to transform these communities and going to transform at a scale and a speed that we've never seen before. It's $27 billion out of an Inflation Reduction Act that had hundreds of billions of dollars in it, covering all matter of clean energy technology growth and deployment. And in this announcement, we've designed ways to mobilize private financing and private capital to address not just the climate crisis, not just emissions, but to grow jobs, to ensure our country's economic competitiveness, and yes, to address the climate crisis. And here's the key. It's intentionally designed to engage communities. Something like this has never been done by the federal government. And groups like the ones who were at the event, the NGOs who were looking at housing justice, climate justice, environmental justice, job justice, knowing the integration of all of those things, were at the table and will be at the table in a way that's never happened before. So the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund has three major programs. The National Clean Investment Fund, so that's choosing one or two clean energy financing centers nationwide. They're the Clean Communities Investment Accelerators, so another 2 to 7 regional hubs. And these networks, they've been called green banks or climate banks. The idea is to bring clean energy financing off of the sidelines and into the communities where it's needed most. And the third program is the Solar for All program, $7 billion that will be dispersed through states, municipalities, tribes, and the territories that will enable low-income and disadvantaged communities to deploy at a scale that's never been done before. But that's not it. This is not just about a $27 billion green bank or climate bank. This is about a process that brings those communities to the table. So in addition to that, there's another several $100 billion going to programs like the Community Equity and Resilience Initiative, Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers, Environmental Justice Thriving Communities Grantmaker Program, Technical Assistance Services for Community Programs. I know, huge mouthful of government speak, and you should just be grateful that I didn't use the acronyms. So these are hugely well-funded programs that provide for spaces for communities to learn, connect, dream, and cultivate ideas. They provide capacity for communities to understand, apply for, and manage what can be an overwhelming and complex federal granting system. That's the same thing we heard in every community that we went to. And what will this funding, that scaffolding funding provide? It'll allow the government to meet the communities where they're at and to listen, and to listen, and to listen, and to understand their hopes and dreams, to connect their expertises with the solutions that we have at federal government in terms of funding, and to move forward with those solutions in a way that can address the concerns so that they can address and access the catalytic funding that's coming from the federal government in a way, again, that has never happened. And we've already done this on a smaller scale. We've already engaged with communities and got funding out the door for the kinds of technologies that are really going to ramp up not just local air pollution solutions, better health in these communities, jobs in these communities, but addressing climate change and CO2 emissions and other emissions as well. So for example, last year, the federal government got out the door about $1 billion of a $5 billion tranche that's coming from the bipartisan infrastructure law to buy electric school buses in communities with high asthma rates. We've designated funding for solar projects all over the country, but particularly in those communities, for example, this one here, that is putting solar on a hazardous waste site. And to the booming offshore wind industry. This is in New Bedford here, reinvigorating former down and out ports all along the eastern seaboard. This has already begun, but this next phase will be ramped up, not just in Dorchester, but in New York and Miami and Kansas City and rural towns all over the country, in tribes and in territories. I've been working in this space for decades, as some of you know, and I've never been so optimistic. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and its sister programs and the efforts that are being made in states and cities all over the country are designed to intentionally do the work of climate justice from the grassroots up and center those who are overburdened and underserved. That is the key to unleash public and private catalytic investments where climate change can be halted and clean energy and justice need to thrive. Thank you.